It's the Brian LIRR Show on WNYC. Good Monday morning, everyone. Let's talk about this Long Island Railroad strike, making it not a good Monday morning for a lot of people. We're told that negotiations have resumed this morning, just a little while ago, so we'll take a closer look than you might get in the headlines about what the issues are. Also, with some of the underlying structural things. Have you wondered about these? Like, why does the LIRR have 5 separate unions? Why is just this branch of the MTA on strike? That is, do Metro North or New York City bus and subway workers all have different pay and work rules? They're all MTA employees. The MTA runs all of those. And here's one way the Long Island Railroad strike is becoming an election year issue. Republican gubernatorial candidate Bruce Blakeman, who is also the Nassau County executive, so this is local to him, is calling on Governor Hochul to suspend the congestion pricing toll to drive into Midtown while the strike is going on for a little relief, he says, for the people who do generally choose public transportation but don't have that option during the strike. The governor says that's beyond her powers under the law. Our transportation editor, Clayton Guse, is with us, and we'll check in with transportation reporter Stephen Nessen, who is at one usually very busy Long Island Railroad hub, which is busy in a different way this morning. Hey, Clayton, I know you're covering this round the clock right now, so thanks for giving us some time on the show. Hi.
Yeah, hey, Brian, how you doing?
And listeners, we can take some different threads of calls or texts from you. First of all, any striking workers listening right now want to call in and explain to the public why you think this is in their interest or worth their inconvenience right now? Striking workers, you're invited. Make your case. 212-433. WNYC, call or text 212-433-9692. Anyone who usually uses the Long Island Railroad but can't right now, you're invited too. Tell us how you're compensating. Are you working from home? And that's why you're available to call in. Are you stuck in your car in extra heavy traffic somewhere, and that's why you're available to listen because you can't work from home and maybe the shuttle buses don't go where you need them to? What do you think of the strike? Or give us a real-time traffic report. You can do that too from the LIE or the northern or southern state or wherever you are. 212-433, WNYC 433. 9692, or anyone with a comment or a question about the Long Island Railroad strike, an opinion, or a question about something you'd like to better understand. 212-433, WNYC 433 9692. So, Clayton, what's the latest on negotiations? Are they happening? And if so, where?
Yeah, they're back at the table this morning at 2 Broadway. That's downtown. That's MTA headquarters. You know, on late Friday night, or they had for weeks and months telegraphed this, May 16th deadline. Right at midnight, they walk out of negotiations at 2 Broadway. The strike was on. They've been on Saturday and Sunday they were saying there was back and forth as to when they were going to go back to the table. There's been some talks over the weekends, but these 5 unions are back at the table with the MTA this morning, and they're really, from what we understand, the big hang-up right now is just kind of about less than a percentage point, maybe a percentage point, in how much they're going to get a raise in the 4th year of the 4th-year contract. Part of this context, too, is that they haven't had a contract for almost 3 years, so they're looking for a 4-year contract. They'll kind of expire next year. Once this is settled, these workers are going to get a tremendous amount of retroactive pay, but they're really hung up on this last year, how much they're going to get a raise. The unions were previously asking for a 5% raise during that 4th year of the deal. Now they've come down a little bit. That's what we know, but a lot of this is kind of private negotiating behind, closed doors, dark, smoky rooms.
Is it just pay or also pay plus work rules or benefits? Can you run any of that down for us if there is that?
Well, we can at least give you the context of what has been discussed. We don't actually know what they're negotiating over, but there are a lot of work rules that the MTA is very bothered by, right? A very notable one is that MTA or Long Island Railroad crews will get, or locomotive engineers will get double pay, 2 days pay if they operate an electric train and a diesel train on the same day, right, in different areas. They'll also get extra pay if they run, double pay if they run special service to events like, extra Mets games or something like that in some cases. So those are the very, kind of controversial areas that the MTA says just blows up their budget. There's also, the MTA has been was previously pushing to get changes to work rules that allow ticket clerks to do kind of change their line of work, right? Most ticketing is on the apps. It's going more digital. So they're saying, why do we need to pay all these ticket clerks? We don't really know what the status of those work rule negotiations are, how this is going to shake out, what it's going to look like, how things are going to change. But those were all kind of within the larger context of negotiations as we led up to this strike.
Stephen Nessen is also with us, transportation reporter for WNYC and Gothamist. He's at the Hicksville station. Am I right, Stephen? You're still at Hicksville? I heard you there a little while ago.
I'm still at Hicksville. I've been here since about 6 a.m.
And that's, for people who don't know the system, where the Port Jefferson and Ronkonkoma branches both have a major stop. So we're a little past normal rush hour now. Is there a scene there at Hicksville station with commuters and buses or anything?
Well, Brian, at 9 o'clock a.m., the shuttle buses stop running for the morning. So they start about 4:30 a.m., and they were going pretty frequently. Like every 10, 15 minutes, the buses would leave. So nobody felt like they missed a bus 'cause they were going pretty steadily throughout the morning, but that's done. So there have been a few stragglers who showed up who thought they could catch a later one, and they've been directed to the nice buses, the Nassau County public bus system, to take them as close to Jamaica as humanly possible. I think there is a bus that goes there, but God knows how long it's going to take. But the other scene here are the workers on strike. They've set up like an encampment. I don't know if you can hear cars honking, but like they're getting a lot of support out here, at least according to the honking cars. And there's dozens and dozens of folks. They've got signs. They've got a barbecue going. They've got some tunes. And it definitely looks like they're here for the long haul. I think they've actually been here since Saturday, like Clayton was saying. The strike actually started Saturday morning at midnight.
Wait, when people honk at me, they're usually not telling me they love me. Are you sure the honkers are in support of the strike?
Well, it sounds like a friendly honk, and everyone starts cheering. So it seems like at least they're happy. But if you're in a car, I guess you're less concerned about the strike because you're driving somewhere, whereas a lot of folks here are pretty frustrated that they have to take a bus to the subway in the morning.
What are the strikers chanting, if anything, or do they have signs that put it in any interesting ways?
They say equal pay for equal work. I'm not quite exactly sure how that relates here with the strike. They want fair wages, is what they're saying. They're saying, what do we want? Justice is what they're chanting this very second. So I suppose justice in the terms of fair wages is what they've been asking for this whole time, what they consider fair wages. How's the vibe among the commuters you've been talking to? Like, how supportive or resentful of the strikers, if you have a sense? Well, to quote you, Brian, my unscientific survey is that it seems fairly divided, I guess. The number one word I heard from folks this morning was stressful. The morning is stressful, trying to figure out how to get to work, how to get home, how to juggle all of life's responsibilities without having, the railroad that folks have relied on. But there's some sympathy for the workers, and there's a lot of folks who are not sympathetic at all. They say that, these guys need to get back to work. They're already paid more than I am. We rely on this. This is ridiculous. And some frustration with the MTA as well, that they're not just giving these guys what they want. So I would say it is somewhat divided, but I think, at 6 a.m. when you're trying to get into Manhattan for work, there's not a lot of sympathy for striking workers. Let's take a phone call. Here's Daphne in Queens, which, as some of you may know or may not know, is geographically on Long Island. So is Brooklyn. Daphne, you're on WNYC. Hi.
Good morning, Brian. God bless you. It's lovely to talk to you and your listeners.
And great to have you. Do you have a stake in this or a question?
I guess I have a concerned opinion. As I was stating, and I was able to have the time to do the math. So I was watching the news yesterday. I think it was ABC News or NBC News, and they were saying that the LIRR is losing approximately $70 million a day from their employees being on strike. And so, now that I have a calculator now, I was able to find out. So if they're losing $70 million a day, that means that for the year, that profit that you're intaking is $21,900 million. And so, once again, now I have the time. I'm sorry, it's a little outside. I was able to find out, so the LIRR, they have about 7,000 to 7,500 employees. And so with me doing, I guess my own set of math, you can afford to pay these people, this is what came out. So 21,900 million, dividing that by the 7,000 employees or the 7,500 employees, that's 2.92. So now that I'm factoring that on the million scale, you mean to tell me you can't afford to pay, $2.92 more? I mean, even though I mean.
Right, I understand. And Daphne, I'm going to leave it there. Credit to Daphne for crunching the numbers as an involved citizen. Clayton, well, I read critiques of the union this morning that kind of go to some of the things that she's raising, and she's obviously in support of the union. But the New York Post editorial page and the Washington Post editorial page, which now falls into the conservative category, the Washington Post argues that the union is striking largely over, quote, a bullheaded unwillingness to negotiate over work rules that make the system woefully inefficient. So how much does your reporting back up the notion that there are work rules that make the system inefficient in a way that, thinking about Daphne's number crunching, makes it more expensive for writers or for taxpayers, and that's unnecessary?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few ways to go into this, Brian. I mean, Long Island Railroad is some of these, the MTA and MTA Chairman Lieber is, as these labor negotiations have broken down, has really used some strong language on the workforce and the unions you kind of haven't seen in the past. And he's pointed out a couple things, right? He's pointed out that they're among the highest paid public servants in the state. He's pointed out that there are a lot of people that make a tremendous amount of money in overtime. And I think a big part of the context here, Brian, is that what muddied the waters in the last decade is these repeated kind of a steady drumbeat of overtime fraud scandals. You might remember 7 years ago, it was heavily covered across the city. There was a group of 5 or 6 Long Island Railroad workers who were indicted for, lying about their timesheets, hiding their phones in cases so that their location couldn't be tracked, reporting that they were working 23 hours a day, 7 days a week. Some of them were the highest paid employees at the MTA. And they got indicted. Some of them went to prison. They were still allowed to keep their pensions. A lot of this overtime fraud was about, because your pension at the MTA and LIRR is based on your last year of service. So they're really boosting their pay to try and cash in on a big pension. And even in the last year, we've seen an MTA Inspector General report where there was a system of Long Island Railroad employees cloning their swipe time cards so that they could scan each other in and steal time and cheat time. So all that kind of has muddied the water for the MTA. It's left blood in the water, but it's made them very upset. And
Right.
A lot of people inside the MTA feel that these unions have aided and harbored fraudsters. On the other side of this, right? That's a small, as far as we know, that's a relatively small percentage of the workforce. A lot of these workers just want to, are honest, want to go punch a clock, and they want to get, a raise that's, keeping up with or maybe a little bit ahead of the aggressive inflation rates here. And I think that the other side of this, right, is that the Long Island Railroad it's a very, it's subsidized. It's not like a money-making railroad like it was a century ago, but it's the busiest, it's the highest ridership public commuter railroad in the country. And it was on the brink of failure coming out of COVID. The ridership was down. There was a lot of federal aid coming out. They needed to get riders back. They were really struggling. Governor Hochul has really repeatedly pointed out that she really flexed a lot of money into the MTA and the Long Island Railroad, flexed a lot of subsidies into helping bring service back, and ridership has really rebounded. And Hochul is saying very publicly, I just spent all this money to get this railroad back on stable financial footing for the riders. I don't want to lose any of that economic progress or any of this budget stabilizing progress by giving these unions a very sweetheart deal. So that's, I think, kind of core to this, is like there are people who, to their credit, do great work out there and are demanding, a raise against these high rates of inflation. But there's also all these other problems that have really muddied the waters and kind of come to a head with this strike.
And Stephen, kind of the opposite of what we heard from Daphne, who supports the union after crunching the numbers on what they make. Listener writes, I would like to understand the claim that some Long Island Railroad Union members and leaders make more money than the governor. How is that possible, writes this listener. First of all, is that factual?
We'd have to check the latest stats. Maybe Clayton has it on the top of his head, but there have been years where it's happened for sure.
Yeah, I think the governor makes about $250, and there's some workers that make more than that, more than $100K in overtime. For the record, the MTA chairman makes more than the president of the United States.
Right. Well, this goes to some of the structural issues that I mentioned in the intro. So, Stephen, if you know, why is just this branch of the MTA on strike? That is, do Metro North or New York City bus and subway workers all have different pay, different work rules? They're all MTA employees. The MTA runs all of those. So why is it just this, and how different are, Long Island Railroad pay and benefit structures from other MTA transit workers?
Well, I mean, they're all different unions, right? So they all have different work rules, different requirements, but this particular, these 5 unions are currently, and they only represent really more than half of the Long Island Railroad workforce, but you can't really run the railroad without them. But, the subway and bus workers, they're under the Transport Workers United, TWU Local 100. And by the way, they're also having contract negotiations, but it's different rules because the Long Island Railroad's a commuter railroad, so they're actually not governed by the Taylor Law, which the TWU is. So that's why subway and bus workers are not likely to go on strike because it would be against the law. But these guys are, they fall under, the national railroad system. So, and that's because of a long-standing history, right?
Yeah, I can just a point of context that's kind of interesting. I mean, this is basically a product of how the MTA was cobbled together in the 60s and 70s, right? The MTA was kind of formed after the state bought and bailed out the Long Island Railroad in 65 and then took Triborough away from Robert Moses and combined it all with New York City Transit Authority, right? So we had these 3 kind of disparate agencies all coming in. Then they formed Metro North when they took over the New York Central commuter lines and formed a partnership with Connecticut to kind of run the New Haven line. So you kind of have it's a really Frankenstein agency that has all these very old unions, right, that have been, date back to a long time ago. And even if you look, what Metro North is today is what the New York Central was, the Vanderbilt Railroad. What Long Island Railroad is today is what used to be owned by the Pennsylvania Railroad, right? It runs into Penn Station and it's through the East River tunnels. So it's like a lot of the product of why these are kind of all these disparate unions, all these kind of different work rules predate the existence of the MTA and really date back to the days of private railroad tycoons when these made a lot of money, when these were profitable enterprises that then unions in turn responded by forming and taking their cut, taking their piece of these businesses a long time ago.
Bruce Blakeman's proposal to suspend congestion pricing while the strike is on. Stephen, do you know what the governor's response to that, Governor Hochul's response? Obviously, they're running against each other in the election for governor right now.
Right. I believe she said it would just be technically illegal. They can't just shut it off at a whim. There's the federal government sort of regulated, and we went through great exertions to get congestion pricing up and running. And even the federal government tried to sue to stop it, and lost. So it's not like a switch they can just flip on and off at a whim. And that would probably be an abuse of the rules of congestion pricing. So that's not going to happen. I will say on my drive out, I can't say I drive too often out to Long Island reverse commute, but it was backed up bumper to bumper, although it may be like that most days going into the city.
Yeah. I must say I know some politicians who issue executive orders without worrying so much whether they're legal, but I think that's a different segment. Last couple of questions. Clayton, has Mayor Mamdani weighed in at all? When the Building Workers Union had authorized a strike recently, and when the nurses were on strike, he voiced support. And this affects the city as well as the island. Has the mayor weighed in?
Not yet. He's having a presser right now. Actually, we have a reporter, Liz Kim, up there, so we hope to press him on that. But a couple points of context. His, Claire Valdez, who's running for Congress in Brooklyn and Queens, who Mamdani's endorsed, she joined the picket line with the workers at Penn Station, very supporting them. But I think Mamdani's he's got to be careful here, right? Because he doesn't want to alienate Hochul, especially when the state budget's up in the air. A state budget that is going to balance the city's budget, it needs to, and kind of is looming over Mamdani's head. He doesn't want to alienate the governor, and this is a very sensitive strike for the governor, especially if she's in an election year. So I would estimate that he is being very mindful about how he wants to pick a side here, because he's he came into office very pro-labor, very pro-trade, like both public sector and private sector labor. Like you said, you saw him joining picket lines with the nurses and building workers and others. But if so far we've seen, if Claire Valdez is maybe a proxy for Mamdani, maybe just because she's a DSA-affiliated candidate, but so far we haven't seen Mamdani really chime in a meaningful way about this strike, other than telling people what their kind of transportation alternatives are.
And the governor says if they say yes to all the union's demands, they'll have to raise fares more than the usual schedule. So, Clayton, 20 seconds. Do you have a best guess how or when, mostly when, this will end?
Well, if you're looking at back of the napkin math, the unions are losing money, right? They're not getting paid right now. So if it breaks down to a percentage point that they're apart, you get to 3, 4, 5 days in, you start to lose some of those gains. The MTA chair and Governor Hochul pointed that out over the weekend. So that's where the kind of rubber hits the road. You saw the nurses go on strike for a very long time, and they might have taken a hit on that because they lost all those lost wages. That builds up into percentage points and it takes a while to make that back. So I would think, given that math, that we're not going to see this drag on too long. New Jersey Transit went on strike this time last year. It was 3 days. We're on the third day here in Long Island.
WNYC Transportation Editor Clayton Guse and Transportation Reporter, live from Hicksville, Stephen Nessen. Thanks, Clayton. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Brian.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.